Your Honor, my marriage with this thing was a colossal mistake.
Your Honor, my marriage with this thing was a colossal mistake. Marcus Hartwell stood with his hand casually resting on Vanessa's shoulder, his smirk wide and confident. 10 years ago, I made a charitable decision. I married a woman who, let's be honest, had no business being in my social circle. A black woman with no connections, no pedigree, no sophistication. I thought I was being progressive. Turns out I was just being naive. Vanessa leaned into the microphone, her voice saccharine sweet. Marcus has such a big heart. He actually believed he could make her into someone respectable. But you can't polish certain things, can you? Some people are just meant to serve, not sit at the table. The courtroom chuckled. Someone in the back row whispered loudly, "Should have known better than to marry the help." Maya Richardson sat motionless at her table, her dark hands folded on the worn mahogany surface. Her natural hair was pulled back in a simple bun. She wore a navy dress from Target, no jewelry except her wedding band. To everyone watching, she embodied exactly what they expected. A black woman who had somehow married up, now facing the inevitable correction when a successful white CEO realized his mistake. Then Maya's shoulders trembled. A single tear traced down her dark cheek. She reached for a tissue with shaking hands, dabbing at her eyes. A quiet sob escaped her lips. Vanessa's laugh rang out, bright, tinkling, cruel. Within seconds, others joined her. Soft chuckles rippled through the gallery like a wave of contempt. Even Marcus's $800 an hour lawyer smirked, shaking his head. To them, this was inevitable. The emotional black woman, overwhelmed, breaking down because she was losing access to a life she never deserved in the first place. What none of them realized was that Maya wasn't crying from weakness or defeat. She was crying from rage, the kind of cold, calculated fury that doesn't explode. It plans. Have you ever been so angry you could barely breathe? Tell us in the comments. Marcus continued, emboldened by her tears and the gallery's laughter. Your Honor, I'm offering $900,000 and 5% of marital assets. That's extremely generous considering she came from nothing and contributed nothing. Frankly, she should be grateful I'm willing to give her anything at all after I gave her opportunities she never would have had otherwise. The unspoken words hung in the air. Opportunities a black woman from her background could never have achieved alone. Before we continue, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from, and subscribe. What happens next will shock you. Mr. Hartwell. Judge Patricia Wesley, a black woman who'd spent 25 years watching entitled men perform in her courtroom, leaned forward with ice in her voice. You'll get your turn to pontificate, but first, Mrs. Richardson's counsel has something to present. The modest older attorney beside Maya started to speak, but the courtroom door swung open. A distinguished black man in his late 60s entered, his three-piece suit immaculate, carrying a leather briefcase embossed in gold. Ashford Industries Legal Division. The temperature in the room shifted dramatically. Marcus frowned, his tone dismissive. Your Honor, we weren't informed of any additional counsel, and I have to question the credibility. He stopped himself, but everyone heard what he'd almost said. Everyone saw the way his eyes traced over Mr. Thornton's dark skin with skepticism, the unspoken assumption that a black attorney couldn't possibly represent serious money. Mr. Thornton. Judge Wesley's voice held a note of recognition, even respect, and a warning edge directed at Marcus. Please approach the bench. Vanessa's smirk faltered. Marcus's $800 an hour lawyer suddenly looked very small in his chair. The elderly attorney moved with the quiet authority of someone who'd spent decades in boardrooms where billions changed hands. Your Honor, I represent the estate of James Ashford III. I'm here to execute the final conditions of his will regarding his daughter, Maya Richardson Ashford, and to introduce evidence crucial to these proceedings. The silence that followed was absolute. Marcus spun toward Maya, his face a mask of confusion and growing panic. Ashford? What is he talking about? Your last name is Richardson. You said your family. You told me you came from nothing. Maya spoke for the first time that morning, her voice carrying a calm strength that silenced the room. It was Richardson. 12 years ago, I legally dropped my father's name because I wanted to be loved for who I was, Marcus, not where I came from. I wanted someone to love Maya, not the Ashford fortune. She paused, her eyes meeting his with devastating clarity. You failed that test every single day. What Marcus Hartwell didn't know, what no one in that courtroom except Mr. Thornton and Judge Wesley understood, was that Maya Richardson had spent the last 3 months documenting every detail of her husband's betrayal with the precision of someone who'd learned to survive by being smarter than everyone who underestimated her. 3 months earlier, when Marcus had served her with divorce papers, she'd sat in their bedroom, the one she'd decorated, the one she'd made into a home while he was building his empire on her family's hidden foundation, and made a decision. She called Mr. Thornton, the family attorney she'd barely spoken to since her father's funeral 7 years ago. The will, she'd said quietly. You told me it was sealed until a specific moment. Is this that moment? Mr. Thornton had been silent for a long time. Then, Ms. Richardson, your father wrote that the will would be unsealed when you faced a test of character from those who don't know your true worth. I believe we're there. But Maya did more than wait for her inheritance to save her. She'd spent those 3 months becoming the analyst her father had trained her to be before she'd walked away from that life. She pulled bank statements, traced money transfers, documented every conversation, every humiliation, every moment when her husband and his mistress treated her as less than human because of the color of her skin. She hired a forensic accountant who owed her father a favor. She built a case that would have made any prosecutor weep with joy, because that's what people never understood about Maya Richardson Ashford. She wasn't a victim. She was a strategist who'd spent 10 years in a marriage where she was constantly underestimated, constantly dismissed, constantly reduced to nothing more than the color of her skin and the racist assumptions that came with it. And now it was time to show them exactly who they'd been dismissing. Mr. Thornton opened his briefcase with theatrical precision. Your Honor, before we proceed with Mr. Hartwell's generous offer, there are several financial discrepancies that must be addressed. Marcus's lawyer shot to his feet. Your Honor, this is ambush tactics. We haven't been provided with— Sit down, counselor. Judge Wesley's voice could have frozen fire. Mr. Thornton has filed all appropriate motions. Continue. The elderly attorney pulled out a folder thick with documents. Mr. Hartwell claims to have built his company independently. However, our investigation reveals that Hartwell Technologies received its seed funding, $500,000, from an investment firm called Redstone Ventures 7 years ago. Marcus relaxed slightly, some of his confidence returning. That's correct. A private equity firm saw my potential and— Redstone Ventures, Mr. Thornton continued smoothly, is a wholly owned subsidiary of Ashford Family Holdings. The beneficial owner of that investment was Ms. Richardson Ashford, though she was unaware of the specific allocation at the time. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. His face went slack. Furthermore, Mr. Brereton, Thornton laid out another document with meticulous care, the Morrison manufacturing contract, the one Mr. Hartwell often cites as his breakthrough deal that established his company's credibility, was facilitated through Ashford Industries. Morrison Manufacturing is a subsidiary of Ashford Industries, Your Honor. The executive who took a chance on Mr. Hartwell's company was following guidance to support Ashford family interests. Vanessa grabbed Marcus's shoulder, her perfectly manicured nails digging into the expensive fabric. What is he saying? You told me you built everything yourself. You said she was nothing. But Mr. Thornton wasn't finished. He was just getting started. Additionally, the residence at 1847 Maple Ridge Drive, currently valued at $2.4 million and listed as jointly owned, is actually held under mortgage by Ashford Family Trust. Mr. Hartwell has been living in his wife's house for the past 6 years, paying a mortgage to her family trust without realizing it. The courtroom erupted in whispers and gasps. Marcus's face had gone from red to white to gray in a matter of seconds. Maya watched it all with the quiet satisfaction of someone who'd been called simple one too many times, who'd been laughed at for crying, who'd endured a decade of being treated as less than because of her skin color. She thought of every dinner party where she'd been ignored, every business event where she'd been treated like decorative arm candy, every whispered comment about how Marcus had saved her from poverty, how charitable he was to marry someone like her. She remembered the country club incident, when Vanessa had arranged a couples event at an exclusive club where Maya was one of only 3 black people in attendance, and made a show of telling everyone how brave and progressive Marcus was for bringing his black wife to a place like this, as if Maya's presence was some sort of social experiment. She remembered the company Christmas party where a drunk executive had asked Marcus loudly if he'd gotten his wife from one of those urban charity programs, and the room had erupted in laughter. She remembered Marcus's weak chuckle, his failure to defend her, his embarrassed silence that spoke louder than any words could have. But Marcus Hartwell's world was about to get much, much worse. What really happened after he refused to defend her that night? The answer will leave you speechless. Maya reached into her own bag and pulled out a tablet. She slid it across the table to her modest attorney, who passed it to Mr. Thornton with a knowing look. "Your Honor," Mr. Thornton said, his voice taking on an even more serious tone. "My client has also been conducting her own investigation over the past 3 months. Mrs. Richardson Ashford may not have a business degree from an Ivy League school, but she has something more valuable, her father's training in financial forensics, and a lifetime of learning to pay attention to details that powerful men tend to overlook." He connected the tablet to the courtroom's display screen. Spreadsheets appeared, color-coded and meticulously organized, each line item highlighted and cross-referenced. "These are bank statements showing unauthorized transfers from Hartwell Technologies operating accounts to a private account in the name of Vanessa Pierce. Total amount, $247,000 over 18 months. Vanessa shot to her feet, her voice shrill with panic. "That's a lie! Those were legitimate business expenses." "Receipts," Maya said quietly, her voice cutting through Vanessa's protestations like a blade. "Show purchases at luxury retailers, including Neiman Marcus and Saks Fifth Avenue, a Mercedes-Benz lease, cosmetic procedures totaling $23,000, and a $15,000 vacation to Bali. None approved by the company board. None reported as taxable income. None remotely connected to legitimate business purposes." Mr. Thornton smiled with grim satisfaction. "Mrs. Richardson Ashford has quite the gift for financial analysis. It's almost as if she comes from a family that built a fortune on careful attention to numbers and patterns that others miss." But the real bomb hadn't dropped yet. Judge Wesley leaned forward, her expression unreadable but her eyes sharp. "Mr. Thornton, you mentioned a will." "Yes, Your Honor." The elderly attorney's voice softened with emotion. "Maya's father, James Ashford III, passed away 7 years ago. He was the founder and CEO of Ashford Industries, one of the largest privately held manufacturing conglomerates in the nation. His will contained specific instructions regarding his daughter." He pulled out a formal document, sealed with red wax and bearing the signatures of 3 witnesses. Mr. Ashford's will was to remain sealed until his daughter faced a moment where her character was tested by those who didn't know her true worth. He specified that the executor, myself, would determine that moment and act accordingly. Marcus was shaking his head violently, as if he could deny reality through sheer force of will. "This is insane. This can't be real. Maya never said anything about—" "Because she wanted you to love her, Mr. Hartwell." Mr. Thornton's voice carried decades of disappointment in humanity, the weariness of someone who'd seen this story play out too many times. "She dropped the Ashford name. She lived modestly. She never touched her trust fund. She wanted to know if you could love Maya Richardson, the woman, not Maya Ashford, the heiress. She wanted to know if you could see past her skin color to the person beneath. He opened the will and began to read, his voice clear and steady. To my daughter Maya, I leave the following. 40% ownership of Ashford Industries, currently valued at $136 million. The family estate in Connecticut, including all structures and acreage, valued at $24 million. Trust funds totaling $42 million. The art collection, valued at $18 million. And the real estate portfolio, including properties in Manhattan, Boston, Chicago, Los Angeles, Miami, and Atlanta, valued at $31 million. The silence in the courtroom was deafening. People had stopped breathing. The total inheritance, Mr. Thornton said quietly, letting each word land with devastating impact, is approximately $251 million. Vanessa made a sound like a wounded animal, somewhere between a gasp and a sob. Marcus looked like he'd been struck by lightning, his body rigid, his face a mask of absolute shock. But Mr. Thornton held up one more document, a letter written in elegant handwriting on heavy cream paper that practically radiated old money and established power. Your Honor, Mr. Ashford also left a personal letter to be read at this moment. With your permission? Judge Wesley nodded, her own eyes suspiciously bright with emotion. Mr. Thornton cleared his throat and began to read, his voice thick with feeling. Maya, you rejected the Ashford name because you thought it defined you. I was angry then, hurt by what I saw as rejection of everything our family stood for. But in hiding your identity, you revealed your true character, something I failed to teach your siblings who inherited my arrogance instead of my values. The words seemed to fill the courtroom, reaching into corners where injustice and prejudice had hidden for too long. You chose authenticity over advantage. You loved without transaction. You served without recognition. You endured dismissal, prejudice, and contempt because you believed in something bigger than yourself, bigger than money or status. This wealth is yours not because of blood, but because you proved you never needed it to define your worth. Maya felt tears sliding down her cheeks, not tears of sadness or humiliation like before, but tears of something she'd waited her whole life to hear. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you I was proud while I lived, the letter concluded. Mr. Beese, Thornton's voice breaking slightly. I'm telling you now. You are everything I hoped you'd be and more than I deserved as a daughter. Use this inheritance as you see fit. Let it amplify your voice, not define it. The world tried to make you small because of the color of your skin, because of assumptions and prejudices that have nothing to do with your actual worth. Show them that true power isn't given by society. It's claimed by those wise enough to know their own worth. Love, Father. The silence that followed was sacred, profound, the kind of silence that comes after truth has been spoken and cannot be unspoken. Then Judge Wesley spoke, her voice steady but laden with emotion and righteous anger. Mr. Hartwell, you came into this courtroom claiming you built everything yourself. You claimed your wife contributed nothing. You offered her 5% of assets that were largely built on her family's foundation, with her family's money, through her family's connections. You brought your mistress to watch your wife's humiliation, to laugh at her tears, to mock her pain. And worst of all, you reduced a woman of extraordinary worth to nothing more than stereotypes and assumptions based on the color of her skin. She shuffled papers, her jaw set in a hard line. I'm awarding Mrs. Richardson Ashford 60% of all marital assets, including Hartwell Technologies stock. You will also be investigated for financial disclosure fraud. Ms. Pierce, you'll be hearing from the district attorney's office regarding embezzlement charges. Vanessa began to cry in earnest now, mascara running down her carefully sculpted face in dark rivulets. Marcus, you said she had nothing. You said she was nobody. You said—" "Shut up," Marcus whispered hoarsely, staring at Maya as if seeing her, truly seeing her, for the first time. "Just shut up." Maya stood slowly, gathering her simple target bag, her dignity wrapped around her like armor forged in the fires of every insult, every slight, every moment when people looked at her black face, and her natural hair, and her quiet demeanor, and assumed they knew her story, assumed they knew her worth. She looked at Marcus, really looked at him, and felt nothing but pity. "You had a woman worth $250 million who loved you for who you were, Marcus. And you traded her for a woman who loved you for what she thought you had. The irony is, you never had anything. It was mine all along." She turned to Vanessa, who was still sobbing into her hands. "You were right about one thing, though. Marcus does deserve someone who matches his level. I'm just sorry it took me so long to realize I was always above his." Maya walked toward the courtroom doors, Mr. Thornton falling into step beside her with quiet solidarity. At the threshold, she paused and turned back one last time. "By the way, Marcus, that $900,000 you offered me? That's 0.3% of my actual net worth. I spend more than that on quarterly charitable donations. You were never rescuing me from anything. You were a project I chose, and apparently, I chose poorly." The doors closed behind her with a soft click that sounded like freedom, like justice, like the beginning of something new. Behind her, Marcus Hartwell sat in ruins, his empire revealed as a house built on someone else's foundation. His mistress being fitted for handcuffs, his reputation destroyed by his own arrogance and prejudice. And somewhere, in whatever place the dead go, the ghost of James Ashford III smiled, finally at peace knowing his daughter had found her own strength. Most people would have stopped there, but Maya was just getting started. Subscribe so you don't miss what happened next. 1 year later. Maya Richardson Ashford sat in her office on the 42nd floor of the Ashford Industries headquarters. The Manhattan skyline spread before her like a promise fulfilled, like everything she'd been denied finally coming into focus. She'd taken her seat on the board of directors and immediately revolutionized how the company operated. Her first act was to establish the Ashford Foundation for Hidden Voices, a $50 million endowment providing legal aid, financial education, and business support for women escaping difficult marriages, particularly women of color who face the intersecting challenges of sexism and racism that Maya knew all too intimately. In 12 months, the foundation had helped 847 women file for divorce, recover hidden assets, and start new lives. 15 of them had gone on to start their own businesses. 3 had written best-selling memoirs. 1 had been elected to her state legislature. The ripple effects were already changing lives across the country. Maya herself had become a sought-after speaker on financial literacy, divorce rights, and the hidden wealth gap that occurred when women, especially black women, didn't know their own financial power or didn't have the resources to claim it. She'd been featured in Forbes, Harvard Business Review, and on the cover of Black Enterprise magazine. The interview she gave to Oprah Winfrey went viral, racking up views in the tens of millions, particularly the moment when Oprah asked her how it felt to be called simple by a man who didn't realize she was worth $250 million. Maya had smiled that calm smile that had carried her through the darkest moments of her marriage and the courtroom confrontation. Oprah. Being underestimated is one of the greatest advantages a woman can have. While they're busy thinking you're simple, you're busy being strategic. While they're assuming you're weak, you're building an empire they can't even see. They mistake your grace for submission, your patience for ignorance, your silence for acceptance. And by the time they realize their mistake, you've already won. The clip had been viewed 47 million times and counting. As for Marcus Hartwell, well, karma had perfect timing and a wicked sense of humor. The court awarded Maya 60% of Hartwell Technologies stock, and she immediately sold her shares to a competitor who'd been trying to acquire the company for years. They restructured within weeks. Marcus was removed as CEO within 2 weeks of the acquisition. His remaining assets, after legal fees and settlements, and the destruction of his reputation, amounted to roughly $2.1 million, a fortune to most people, but a catastrophic fall from where he'd been. He now worked as a business consultant, living in a modest condo in New Jersey, his name synonymous in Silicon Valley circles with the cautionary tale of arrogance meeting consequences, of prejudice being exposed and destroyed. Vanessa Pierce pled guilty to embezzlement to avoid the publicity of a trial. She received 18 months probation, had to pay $85,000 in restitution, and perform 500 hours of community service. Her social media accounts, once filled with #upgrade complete and #know your worth posts, had been deleted after screenshots went viral as memes about instant karma. She'd moved to Phoenix and worked as a real estate agent under her maiden name, hoping desperately that no one would recognize her face or connect her to her past. But this story isn't just about revenge or justice, though both were undeniably sweet. It's about something more important, something more transformative. Maya used her position and resources to fund research into the hidden wealth gap, the trillions of dollars in assets that women, particularly women of color, didn't know they had rights to or didn't have the resources to claim. She partnered with law schools to provide pro bono services. She lobbied for laws requiring full financial disclosure in divorce proceedings. She created educational programs teaching financial literacy in communities that had been systematically excluded from wealth-building knowledge for generations. What would you do if you had Maya's power? Tell us in the comments below. That was how Maya Richardson Ashford spent her days now, not just building an empire, but building a ladder and helping other women climb, creating pathways that had never existed before, using her wealth and influence to dismantle the systems that had tried to keep her small. Because here's the truth that no one wants to say out loud. The world is full of Marcus Hartwells, men and women who look at skin color, at economic status, at education pedigree, at zip codes, and decide they know everything about a person's worth. They mistake quiet strength for weakness, humility for inadequacy, grace under pressure for submission. They're in boardrooms and courtrooms, in schools and hospitals, in corner offices and government chambers. They make decisions every day about who deserves opportunity, who gets access, whose voice matters, whose potential is worth investing in. And they're almost always wrong, because true power doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need validation from people too blind to see it. It waits, it plans, it builds in silence, and then, when the moment is right, it reveals itself in ways that transform not just individual lives, but entire systems. That lesson is worth more than $251 million. That lesson is priceless. If this story moved you, do us a favor. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Comment below about a time when you were underestimated or when you recognized someone's hidden brilliance. Subscribe to this channel for more stories that prove potential has no prerequisites, and dignity is a birthright, not a privilege that some people get to grant or withhold.